A Muslim general just took Jerusalem. 90 years of Christian rule. Gone in a single afternoon. Thousands of crusaders fled. Cities surrendered without a fight. The kingdom was collapsing. But one group didn't run. On the road out of the fallen city, a column of warriors in white mantles turned around. They rode back toward the enemy, toward certain death. And what happened next terrified even the man who had just won. This is the story of the Knights Templar. Monks and killers at the same time. Men who prayed in the morning and killed in the afternoon. Who followed a code so extreme their enemies believed they weren't fully human. But the real question isn't who they were. The question is, what turns an ordinary man into something like that? Because behind the white mantles, there was something much darker. A mix of faith, money, and violence that built one of the most dangerous institutions in history. And when it finally fell, it fell in the most dramatic way possible. Let's go back to the start. And the start isn't about soldiers. It's about a problem. The year is 1099. The First Crusade just succeeded. Jerusalem is in Christian hands for the first time in 4 centuries. Pilgrims flood in from across Europe, thousands of them. Walking roads their faith told them were sacred, but those roads were a death trap. Bandits, local warlords, Muslim forces who had no intention of accepting what had happened. Pilgrims were robbed, pilgrims were killed. Entire groups vanished on the road and were never heard from again. The Christian rulers of Jerusalem had a new kingdom and no way to protect it. That problem created the Templars. A French knight named Hugh de Payens went to the king of Jerusalem with a proposal. He and 8 other knights would form a permanent military brotherhood, live like monks, fight like soldiers. The king gave them a wing of his palace, built over the ruins of what was believed to be the Temple of Solomon. That's where the name comes from, the Knights of the Temple. But here's the problem. 9 knights can't protect a kingdom. 9 knights can't even protect a road. So what were they actually doing in those first years under the ruins? Nobody knows for certain. And that's exactly what makes it unsettling. What we do know is what came next. In less than 20 years, the Templars had thousands of members, castles across Europe, and the direct backing of the Pope. How? How does that happen in 20 years? One man made it possible. Bernard of Clairvaux, the most powerful voice in the church. He wrote a document that reframed everything people thought about killing. A normal knight who killed for money or glory was committing a sin, but a Templar who killed did it for God. A Templar who died in battle was a martyr. A Templar who killed in battle was doing sacred work. He invented something that had never existed before. The warrior monk, a man for whom violence wasn't a moral problem. It was a religious obligation, and Christian Europe went wild for it. Donations poured in from nobles across France, England, Spain, Portugal. Land, money, entire estates handed over to the order. Noble families sent their sons to join. The Templars built castles across the Holy Land. They became the permanent army that the Crusader kingdoms couldn't afford on their own. But that wasn't the most important thing they built, because the Templars did something no one expected, something that would reshape the world far more than any battle. They became bankers. A pilgrim in France could deposit money at a Templar house in Paris, receive a coded letter, arrive in Jerusalem and withdraw the same amount. No gold on dangerous roads, no risk of robbery. They had just invented the letter of credit, the first international banking system in history. Suddenly, kings were borrowing from them. Entire national debts ran through Templar accounts. Nearly every crowned head in Europe owed them money. An institution that holds everyone's debt and answers only to the Pope. Think about what that means. Who do you fear more? The man who can kill you, or the man who can ruin you? The Templars were both, and on a battlefield, they were something no enemy had ever faced before. The Templar rule of combat was unlike anything before or after. In medieval warfare, Retreat was sometimes the smart move. You pulled back, regrouped, tried again. Flexibility kept you alive. The Templars were forbidden to retreat unless they were outnumbered more than 3-1. 2 against 1. You charge. You cannot run. Every knight beside you knows the same rule. No hesitation, no calculation. Just forward, fighting against that broke men from the inside. Saladin's commanders documented it. Templar prisoners refused to convert to Islam even when death was the only alternative. Ransoms were rejected. They died. Again and again, Templar knights chose death over compromise. This wasn't bravado. It was the rule. Surrender without the Grand Master's permission was forbidden. They had been trained to value the mission above their own lives. In 1177 at Montgisard, fewer than 500 Templar knights helped destroy a Muslim army of 26,000. Saladin himself barely escaped on a camel. His personal guard gone. His army destroyed. He went on to become the greatest Muslim commander of his age. He never forgot what those 500 men did that day. Never. When he faced them again at Hattin 10 years later, he gave a specific order. Captured Templars and Hospitallers were not to be ransomed, not enslaved, executed, because he had learned something. You cannot negotiate with a man who doesn't value his own survival, and you cannot afford to let him go. Hattin changed everything, and this is where the ground itself mattered. The Christian army marched across a dry plateau in midsummer heat. No water. Saladin had cut off every route to the lake. The Crusaders were dying of thirst before the battle even started. When they finally broke formation looking for water, Saladin surrounded them. The King of Jerusalem, captured. The true cross, taken. Months later, Jerusalem fell. The Templars fought to the last man at Hattin. The few survivors were executed. The order lost an entire generation of its best fighters in one afternoon. And yet, they rebuilt. That's what real power does. It doesn't depend on a single battle. It depends on structure. And the Templar structure kept producing money, recruits, and resources while everything around it burned. For the next century, they held fortresses that seemed impossible to take. Crac des Chevaliers, Castle Pilgrim, structures so well built that modern engineers still study them. They garrisoned positions that needed thousands of men with just a few hundred and made it work. But the Holy Land was slipping away, slowly, irreversibly. Muslim power was consolidating. The Crusader states kept shrinking. Funding from Europe was unreliable. Christian kingdoms couldn't agree on anything. By 1291, Acre, the last major Crusader city, fell to the Mamluks. The Templars made their final stand there, street by street, building by building. Their headquarters held until the walls collapsed on top of them, and then there was nowhere left. An order built to protect pilgrims, with no pilgrims to protect, no holy land to guard. They had wealth, castles, an army with nothing to fight, and enemies who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The most dangerous of them was Philip IV of France. Philip was brilliant, ruthless, and completely broke. His wars had emptied the royal treasury. He owed a fortune to the Templars, and he had figured out something the Templars hadn't seen coming. An institution without a war to fight can be destroyed. He went to Pope Clement V, a French pope who owed his position to Philip's support. He laid out the charges. The Templars were holding secret heretical rituals, worshipping idols, denying Christ, committing obscene acts in their initiation ceremonies. Were any of it true? Almost certainly not. The confessions were pulled out under torture so brutal that men admitted to anything. But truth wasn't the point. Debt was the point. Power was the point. On Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, every Templar in France was arrested at the same time, in a single night. The coordination was extraordinary. Philip had been planning it in silence for years. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was arrested, tortured, and in 1314 burned alive in Paris in front of Notre Dame. As the flames reached him, he cursed them both, Philip and the Pope. He said they would be dead before the year was out. Pope Clement was dead within a month. Philip IV was dead before the year ended. History doesn't do that on purpose, but sometimes it looks like it does. The Templars were dissolved, their wealth officially transferred to the Hospitallers, though Philip quietly took most of it himself. The order that had held the line for nearly 200 years didn't end on a battlefield. It ended in a courtroom, not from military defeat, from political murder. But here's why none of this stays in the past. The letter of credit they invented didn't die with them. It grew. It became the banking system that moves all the money in the modern world. The idea that value can travel without gold physically moving. That idea was born with the Templars, and it never stopped. And the problem they solved on the battlefield still hasn't been fully solved. How do you make a man choose the mission over his own life? How do you build something that cannot be frightened? Every professional military in the world is still working on that answer. The Templars found it, and paid an enormous price for it. Jacques de Molay burning in Paris didn't beg, didn't negotiate, didn't convert to save himself. He had spent 40 years in the order. He had watched the Holy Land fall. He had been tortured, humiliated, betrayed by the very institutions he had served. And at the end, he died exactly the way every Templar before him had been trained to die, without surrender. Whether you call that fanaticism or conviction depends entirely on who you are, but there's no question about what it was. It was the most expensive, most disciplined, most terrifying answer the medieval world ever produced to one simple question. What do you do when the road is too dangerous and no one is coming to protect you? You build something that cannot be frightened, something that doesn't negotiate, something that doesn't stop, and then you hope that what you built doesn't eventually turn against everything you intended. It always does. The question is just when.